There is no, we even talked about it, it's like your universe completely disappears until you start to regain consciousness, and then slowly it reappears again. Well, this is the same with the Absolute. This is a very long cycle, trillions of years. And once it decides to manifest, the very first thing that happens is polarity happens. Just like sticking your finger through the latex. Now you've got positive and negative. So you can't have one without the other. If you have polarity, you can't have a positive without a negative. Once you've disturbed that equilibrium, now you've got something that is out of balance, so to speak. And the natural tendency is for it to, at some point, re-equalize. So that's why the only law in the universe is this law of harmony. And karma's a subset of that law. Everything has to be equalized. There can never be any action without there being something that is the result of that action, ever. So how do we put this into effect? Paul's going to tell us about the types of karma.
I just have to make a comment on the idea of the Absolute being unmanifested and there's no polarity. Well, one of the huge concepts in spiritual circles and New Age thinking is, what is the purpose of life? And I know that question is asked and sort of answered in religions. I wasn't personally satisfied with the answer that I got through Christian religion. The purpose of life, well, at the divine or the Absolute, where there's no polarity, there's no positive, negative, and no real existence at all, that's well and good, but how do you, what's the purpose of that? So the Absolute somehow has a desire to grow and to be, and that's when the outbreath of Brahma occurs and creates a universe. I mean, this is, we're putting some magnificent concept into silly little words, which they can't do it justice, but that's so a beautiful way to describe the purpose of life, is to gain experience. There's no experience at the level of the Absolute. When manifestation occurs and matter comes into being and universes appear and worlds happen and life springs up and interactions happen and drama occurs and plants grow and families have babies, and life happens, that's the purpose. It's to create polarities, to create stuff and action, and that happens. And then, of course, on the contraction movement, like you throw a boomerang out, it goes out and it comes back. On the in-breath, everything that happened is reabsorbed into the Absolute, but it's now that much more enriched. And then for the next out-breath, it's going out into the world or creating worlds again with that much more experience from last time. And that's the huge cycle, the grandest of all cycles, can be applied to every single day that we wake up. We wake up with the experience of yesterday. When our physical body dies in this lifetime, our next incarnation, we're going to be enriched with the experiences of the previous lifetime. It just kind of puts it all into perspective, and I think it's so beautiful the way you were describing that. It kind of satisfies me to think of it that way.
One more comment on that is that the one thing, well, there are a few things that are constant, that never disappear. One is matter. Now, we're not just talking about physical atoms. We're talking about matter on all of those different levels that we passed out a chart last time, showing that there are many different levels of existence and consciousness. And matter exists at all of those levels. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be modified. So there is no being, during that period of pralaya, the non-existence, there is still matter, but it is not organized, it's waiting, it's just there. So even physics recognizes that matter and energy can be transformed one into the other. E equals mc squared, the famous equation where energy can be converted to matter, etc., and back again.
Okay, we talk about three different blocks or subsets of karma. So three kinds. Before I tell you what they are, when correct ourselves before we bump and bruise ourselves. We can learn from other people's bumps and bruises, and we don't have to go through all the lessons ourselves. It's kind of a magic little thing. If we learn from others' mistakes, oh, okay, I don't have to do that to learn the lesson. I'll never have to go through that myself. So that's a little bit about what the term karma means in theosophical principles. We'll get more into it. Terry's going to do a vote.
We're going to do a vote. You know, on the internet, they always want you to vote on stuff, right? Okay. And you can vote more than once. We're not concerned about that. How many of you think life is fair? How many of you think life is sometimes unfair? How many of you aren't sure? Did anybody not vote at least on one of them? All right, so is life fair? Is life unfair? This is a big question. If it's fair, if everything is fair in life, then we've got nothing to do but get ourselves to figure out why it's fair, how anyone could even say that it's fair, and then get ourselves into alignment with it. Is that not correct? Okay, I don't think everyone's completely convinced of that. But look, we don't have to decide immediately. We're just going to give you some ideas, and we're going to thresh out some things amongst ourselves, and then have you contemplate over time. This is how we learn. You don't learn something just by going to a class and, oh, I've got it, never mind, don't have to ever do that again. No, you learn a concept, kind of makes some sense, and then you try putting it into practice in your everyday life. Does it work? Or am I wasting my time? Was the concept defective from the beginning? Maybe I didn't understand it, maybe the person who presented it didn't even understand it. That happens all the time. There's no lack of gurus out there spouting off all these different ideas, including us too. You know, we teach what we have experienced in life and what seems to be working for us. We try to put into practice everything that we talk about. And we have a certain amount of experience with it. We're not totally enlightened just yet. We have no illusions about that. But we do state that we try to put into practice what we preach. And we do have some results. We have seen results from it. And so we try to share what we have learned with other people and get feedback and get other ideas. We have to constantly be tweaking our ideas. If you ever think that you have the absolute truth, that you've got it all completely figured out, you're going to be in trouble. Because sooner or later something's going to come along and smash that, and you're going to have to reform that idea, at least a little bit, maybe not entirely, but we're constantly tweaking our ideas and our understanding of how truth, what is true, and how truth operates in our everyday life. So is life fair or is it unfair? We'll kind of let that lie on the table for the time being. One of the great teachers, one of the adepts, stated in probably around 1881 that there is only one law in the universe, and that is the law of harmony. All other laws are a subset of that one law, the law of harmony. Now, first of all, what is an adept? And second of all, what did he mean by this, that there is only one law in the universe? Very quickly, an adept is an individual, a being who has graduated from the human kingdom. In other words, has gained enough enlightenment or conscious awareness that if he or she chose to, could go on to a different realm of being, even outside our planetary solar system in some instances, and on other realms of existence besides the physical. But a few of them choose to come back and actually use a human body, which is the highest we have available on Earth. So even though they are not technically human anymore, they operate by means of a human body, and they are some of the enlightened teachers in the world. Where are they? They stay far away from the everyday humanity. For very good reason. Our vibrations are completely inimical to them. They could not do the tremendous amount of good that they do if they were living among us and among all of our personal neediness, so to speak. So just be aware that there are these enlightened beings connected with our human physical existence, and who provide inspiration sometimes to individuals unaware of it, completely unaware. So if you are a person who has a certain sphere of influence, for example, they will often interact with world leaders or with people who have a large following. Eckhart Tolle, for example, Oprah Winfrey, any of the leaders of a country. If that person is even a little bit enlightened, at a moment when they are receptive, one of these adepts may plant a thought nearby. And that person may or may not take up that thought, and we're going to be talking about thoughts as karma, and make it their own. And say, wow, I don't know where that thought came from, but I like it. And let me see what I can do with it. The law of harmony. So why is there only one law in the universe? If you think of a sheet of latex or rubber, just a flat sheet of latex, when you look above it and below it, there is no difference. It looks the same on both sides. So the net effect of that is zero. It's kind of like a straight line. But if from underneath it I stick my hand up through that latex, then from the top it looks like a rubber glove, doesn't it? You can see my fingers poking through that latex. But if you were to look at it from underneath, it would be the negative of that. It would be an indentation instead of projecting fingers. So you've got a positive effect looking from one side, you've got a negative effect looking from the other. But you've disturbed the equilibrium. So eventually everything has to come back to that 0 point, to that perfect nothingness. And that's what the term the absolute means. We didn't really talk about the absolute last time, did we? No. Have you all heard of the term the absolute? Anyone? Okay. Okay. The absolute. In our book, the very first chapter, we tell the story of the prodigal son who leaves this seemingly perfect, spiritual, beautiful place to go out into the world and forgets basically everything he ever experienced formerly in his home. And then eventually, after many, many different experiences, he awakens one day and realizes that he's kind of really a stranger and he needs to go back home. And the return journey leads him back to his ancestral home, where he's received with great feasting and celebration. And it's the whole return after having experienced life in the outside world. Well, it's the journey of us as a spiritual being. We left a spiritual source that was completely perfect. Well, that source is the absolute. In the absolute, there are no qualities, there are no characteristics. There's nothing. There's no good, no bad, no evil, there's not even any action. You can't even say that there's being. So it's kind of one of those kind of mathematical concepts, like the concept of zero or infinity. You can't ever reach infinity. You can only kind of approach it. Well, the absolute is sort of that way. You can never consciously get to the absolute, because once you reach there, everything disappears. There's nothing, or seemingly so. It's been described as beingness itself, because you can't even say there is being.
Or the unmanifested or complete potentiality.
Potentiality, so that's what it is. So once, after a very long period of time, and this period of time is called the day and a night of Brahma in Hindu philosophy. The day of Brahma is the out-breath, is the expansion, creation of universes and cosmos. And the in-breath is the coming back in of all of that, being reabsorbed into this state of the absolute. There's no consciousness at all during that period of time. It's referred to as a pralaya, P-R-A-L-A-Y-A. That's the period of rest. And we talked a little bit last time about the periodicity, about these cycles. And so the corresponding cycle in our daily life would be the unconscious sleep. Every day, hopefully, you do have a period where you become totally unconscious. Nothing bothers you. Nothing. Isn't it? All right. Well, welcome all of you. Some of you 2 weeks in a row here now. Let's very quickly go around the room and just tell everybody your name so that we all know each other, at least by name. We'll start in the back with Eugene and then go around.
I'm Eugene.
You're Eugene, okay.
And just for the record, we are filming these for our YouTube videos. So if anybody has any concerns with that, please let us know. But it's just the talk, it's not your faces and stuff, unless they just happen to slip in. Okay.
I'll bypass.
I'm sorry?
I'll bypass.
You'll bypass your name? Okay.
Diane.
Abby, Bonnie, Christine, Lisa,
Richard.
Marianne.
I didn't catch yours.
It's Abby.
Abby, okay.
Paul.
Paul, yes. And I'm Terry. All right. Let's see. A few new faces. I think one or two at least. You're new, and you're new, and
Not new.
and you're new, but you know who we are.
I know who you are.
All right. Introduce us, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, okay. Let's see. You guys all have heard this except for the new people. So my name is Paul Benedict. Terry and I have been studying these spiritual concepts together for about 7 years now. We met at one of the classes that he was facilitating on the basic Theosophy book, which is this book right here, and we can talk a little bit about what Theosophy is if anyone would like to hear that a little bit later. We became friends and became close, and decided to lead a joint discussion group on this book, Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth. This was in 2009 when we did this, and it was enlightening for everyone involved, and for us especially, and we thought, wow, we need to continue this a little bit more, and we really love the idea of marrying the concepts that he teaches with theosophical principles, and out of that marriage, we wrote our book, which is Ancient Wisdom for a New Age, a Practical Guide for Spiritual Growth. And this came out in July of last year, so almost 1 year ago. The soft cover version came out, and then after that, all 3 ebook versions, and then a hardcover version, and now we're almost finished with a Spanish translation. When I'm not studying spiritual concepts with Terry, I work in real estate here in Las Vegas. I've been here since 1991. But this is much more fun than real estate.
All right. Most of you know a little bit about me, so very quickly, I've been studying Theosophy and New Age concepts for about 38 years. Starting with astrology and then other aspects of it. And once I discovered Theosophy, I realized that it had really all of the core information that I was looking for. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but the entire New Age movement owes its origin to Theosophy. Before the Theosophical Society, which was formed in New York City in 1875, there was no organization that had as its purpose to bring Asian philosophy and teachings to the Western world. There were a few what they called Oriental scholars who studied some of the Vedas and some of the Sanskrit works, but only as a sort of curiosity, not with any intention that there was any profound wisdom to be gained therein. It was almost more like studying a primitive religion of some sort that they thought was kind of interesting. But the founders, Helena Blavatsky and Henry Olcott, knew that there were some profound concepts in the Asian tradition which were missing in the Western world and that could help bring some enlightenment. And so they took it upon themselves to start teaching as much as possible these traditions to Western students. And so from that grew the New Age movement. And so I haven't found anything else that has a better explanation of how life works and how the natural laws of the universe operate. And getting right into that, we're going to talk about one of the big laws of the universe today. And what is it? Oh, by the way, we thought afterwards that probably a better name for our topic today would have been "Don't Repossess My Karma." Don't you dare repossess my karma.
Because we need it. Does anyone know why we need our karma? Why it's so important for us?
Growth.
Okay. For growth. What are some of the things that we already know about karma? It's kind of a buzzword in New Age circles. Karma, instant karma. It's my karma.
Correction.
I'm sorry?
Correction.
Ah, okay. Correcting what?
What we did wrong in another lifetime. Or could
Okay.
have done better.
Okay. Sure.
Learning experience.
Guiding us back to the path, to the right path.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. What else do we know about karma already?
Lessons.
Okay.
Lesson.
It's a teacher.
Yes.
Okay. Some of the misconceptions we'll talk about too, but everyone knows a little bit about karma, it seems like, because it's a popular concept. Theosophy breaks it down into its very essence and core and describes what it is and what the purpose of it is. And that's what we're here to understand a little bit more about today. Why is this a fundamental law of the universe, and how do we work with it instead of thinking life is unfair, and the dreaded victim mentality that a lot of us adopt sometimes throughout our lives. When we fully understand and embrace the idea of karma, it's impossible to become a victim anymore, because we understand how the universe works naturally, and we can work with it instead of grinding against it and experiencing friction and heat and conflict. So, karma refers to any cause and its corresponding reaction together. And this can be applied to the physical world, the emotional world, the mental world, and of course science recognizes it in physics. There really aren't any emotional scientists or mental plane scientists that have been able to prove it to the outward world yet, but we feel that's coming. And so a lot of these metaphysical concepts we can only prove to ourselves, and that's perfectly fine. That's all we need to do. There's no reason to prove them to anybody else. But karma refers to any cause and its reaction together. It's one whole process. And any causes that we receive now, it's kind of uncomfortable to think of it this way, but we at some level set that in motion before, whether it was yesterday or last lifetime or thousands of years ago, somehow. The universe never forgets, and it can't, because the universe at its core is completely placid and harmonious. And when humans come along and with our egos and we start disturbing things and causing discordant vibrations, the universe naturally re-equalizes itself, whether it takes 1 second or 1,000 years, but it always re-equalizes itself, and it does that through karma. The universe will never become out of balance permanently. It'll always reorient itself to placidity and to equanimity. It's said that no particle of energy at all in the universe can be expanded without a corresponding effect. So of course we know in physics, the law of gravity, for example, the earth pulls the pen down, you let go of it, it falls to the ground. The same thing happens with thoughts we think and with emotions we feel. This concept is actually found in all the great religions also. It's not described as such that we talk about it in theosophy, though. In religions, sometimes it's described as an outside opposing force. It's not always taught that we have the power to control it and to work with it ourselves. But it is important to know that some forms of karma do show up in all the religions and philosophies. It's very complex in its nature as well. Human beings, as smart and as great as we are, it's impossible for us to begin to understand all of the causes that have been set in motion to create the effects that we're experiencing in the world now. It's impossible for us. Our brains are powerful, there's no doubt, but there's no way to encompass the entire situation in its totality. We might even talk about big major events that seem evil, like the Holocaust. I think that's coming up here pretty soon. What caused it and why? Do we have the ability to figure that out? Well, we're going to try to talk about it a little bit, but it's not our duty or our job to understand the minutiae, the details of every action. All we should try to do is figure out the fundamental guidelines of how karma works and understand how to work with them. An analogy that I like to use, and I think you were saying karma corrects you back to the path, is the idea of a beginner's bowling alley lane. When you bowl and you have the bumpers in the bowling alley, and your ball hits the bumpers and it bounces back and it bounces from side to side. It eventually gets you to the end goal, but sometimes you bump into the edges, and if you are really bad, you might jump over the edge and end up going down a hill or something. And sometimes when I bowl, even that like metal gate comes down, and you throw the ball and it smashes into the gate.
Yeah, they don't like that.
Sometimes if our lifetime if we're so messed up, we might just hit that metal gate and just kind of have a torn out page in the book of our life and of our lives, and we can just kind of redo that life, perhaps. That's the way I look at it. It's a correcting force, and once we finally realize that,
already generated. So Paul told us that each lifetime we're given a portion of karma to work out, and if you do it properly, you work off all of that karma, and the net gain of karma is actually a decrease. So you always want to end up with less karma than you started out with. Now there's two different kinds of karma. Well, there are many different kinds, but in this particular classification there are two. One is personal karma, and the other is universal or impersonal karma. Personal karma comes about from your own desires, your wishes, your whatever is selfishly motivated. And by selfish, I don't mean it in a mean way. I just mean we're self-absorbed, like little children. Little kids are selfish. They're supposed to be. It's all about them, isn't it? They're not worried about world peace and about what the universe needs. They're worried about whether or not they're going to get that toy that they've got their eye on, or whether or not they're going to get to go see the movie that they wanted to go see, or eat what they want for dinner, or get ice cream right now, or, it's all about me right now. Well, there's plenty of adults that are still children. We're still all about me, right? And it's only as you become more enlightened that you decrease the amount of ego or self-centeredness, and you increase the amount of devotion or emphasis on universal needs, on what is helpful to all of the world, all of humanity. What can I do that will help? We don't have to worry about other people's karma. Some people say, well, that person needs to be taught a lesson. Have you ever heard that? He or she needs to be taught a lesson. I remember I was driving with a friend one day, and some guy cut us off and just pulled right in front of me, and I had to brake quickly, and he said, honk at him. And I said, well, why should I honk at him? To let him know you're upset. And I said, I'm not upset. He looked at me like I was an alien or something. I'm like, I'm not upset. Why should I react just because, he was inconsiderate, and I don't have any need to. So that's the sort of thing we talk about, non-reaction and non-attachment. And once we learn not to be reactive and to eliminate our ego, we're going to, I think, have a class about the ego, because that seems to be a hot topic, a button that a lot of people respond to. So I think we're going to have a future class about diminishing and possibly at some point eliminating the ego. So non-reaction, being more concerned about the big picture. Is karma good or bad? In the short term, often it looks absolutely horrid. Someone who has an awful disease that may or may not be terminal. It may have been better if it were terminal. Maybe they have to live for many years and decades with a very difficult disability, and it looks to everyone from the outside that it's this awful karma to deal with. Well, how you perceive it is up to you. As Shakespeare said, nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's your attitude. It's how you choose to see it, just like the Chinese farmer. One thing happened, for example, his son was thrown off a horse and broke his leg. Oh, terrible, he can't help you on the farm anymore. This is terrible karma that you've got here. Maybe, maybe not. The next day, the army is coming through, recruiting all able-bodied young men, and guess what? They pass by and say, oh, what good karma you have. See, what we think is awful sometimes turns out. And if you could raise yourself high enough to see the big picture of all your different lifetimes, nothing is bad. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not world disasters, not massacres, not any of these things. Every single event has its purpose. And the purpose is education and experience. If you could only see it from a high enough perspective, you would never see anything as horror.
The astronaut's perspective.
Yes, exactly.
If we can imagine ourselves as an astronaut orbiting the Earth and seeing our beautiful globe in its entirety, the little details lose some of their significance. It's easier said than done, of course, but that's our goal, to see the big picture.
Forest through the trees.
right?
Yeah.
Seeing the entire forest instead of
Yeah.
just the tree that's in front of your head.
Yes.
Actually, I think it makes life easier to live,
Which way?
to see the big picture.
Yes.
For me, it does.
Of course it does.
Well, you just said it's kind of difficult. I find it easier,
Ah.
really.
Oh,
Well, for most people wouldn't see it. I actually affect everyone, but there are two distinct focal points, me and the object of the thought. Last week, just seemingly out of nowhere, I mentioned the name Neiman Marcus. Why did I think of that? I'll tell you why, because Lisa works there. And because in her mind was that thought of Neiman Marcus, and somehow I picked up on that. I was actually looking for the name of a shopping mall, and I couldn't think of one offhand, so I just thought, well, what's the name of a shop? Neiman Marcus. So, and it's because she was in the room. If she hadn't been in the room, it's probably unlikely that I would have picked that name. But I just want you to start being aware of how your thoughts, and as Paul was saying, eventually we will all be able to read each other's thoughts. We already do to some extent. We're just not aware how much we do. But we pick up on things a lot. So, are you responsible for your thoughts or not? Okay, actually there's a little bit of an out here. And that is, you're responsible for the thought if you created it. But we're surrounded by thoughts all the time. So if that thought just kind of was in the atmosphere created by somebody else and you happen to pick it up, then you're only responsible for what you added to it. If it kind of went into your mind and then left, you simply were an instrument that processed it, and you didn't do anything with it. It just kind of came in your mind and went out. So there you didn't create any karma. But if you then take up that idea, that thought, and make it your own and do something with it, enhance it somehow, then you have incurred some karma. Whether it's good karma or bad karma, Paul will tell you. Actually, tell us your idea about whether it's good or bad.
well, this is one of the misconceptions, I think, that a lot of people who know what the word karma means adopt also. Good karma versus bad karma. Well, we label things however we, for some reason, think we should label them. Good and bad. Just like any situation that occurs to us. It's like the Chinese farmer story that we always tell. Different things happen in his life, and people come up to him and say, oh, this is such a bad thing that's happened to you, I'm so sorry. And then other things happen to this Chinese farmer, and they say, oh, what good fortune you have. But his response is always, oh, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, who knows. But any situation can be labeled good or bad from any perspective possible. So how do we know if it's good or bad? Well, let's just not even call it good or bad. Let's just say it is. Karma means action. It's an action that we have caused. It's an action that we're receiving from a cause. It can be viewed as pleasurable or painful, and it's up to us to determine that. A lot of people, if anyone has traveled to India, that I have not, but Terry has, I've heard from people who've been there that there's a general sense from the lower class of people in India, and there are a lot of them, that they're not in suffering mode. Even though they might not have anything to their name physically, they're not in suffering mode because they at some level understand this differently than we do. They accept their situation. We talk a lot about acceptance all the time. Accepting the world as is. Does that mean we don't ever take action and try to make anything better? No, it doesn't mean that. It means first consciously stop and accept truly, honestly to yourself, accept and then act. So labeling karma as good or bad causes us suffering if we label it bad. If we label it good, it still causes us suffering because it doesn't last. Nothing lasts forever. All structures are impermanent, as Eckhart Tolle says. All structures. Everything that we think is good doesn't last. Everything we think is bad doesn't last. This too shall pass. Right? So labeling things good and bad is our own mental construct, and it causes the suffering that comes along with a bad situation. What it does do, what karma does give us though, is the opportunity to work towards creating a life we do want, and that's the responsibility that's given to all people who take a step on the spiritual path. So anyone who opens the door and peeks their head through in the spiritual onto the spiritual path, we're kind of sucked in, and then the door slams shut, and then we automatically have this responsibility. Okay, now that we know how it works, okay, I guess we have to work to choose this and choose the right actions and understand, darn it, if I do this, I know I'm going to have some bad karma from this, or some karma that's going to cause me suffering. Do I think of it as bad, or do I just think of it as that's what's going to come to me if I do this? Well, it gives us the awesome opportunity to start making choices, to create what's going to happen to us in this lifetime and next lifetime, and even in our after-death state. Does anyone ever think about what's going to happen to you after your physical body dies? Do you ever think about that?
I do.
I've started to after I started reading this stuff, and it takes the fear away from dying. It really does. Because if we create our lives in such a way that we increase our vibrations, we eliminate some of the coarse energy from our lives, remove ourselves from situations that are very drama-filled and ego-filled, we set up our life to be more peaceful and more comfortable, and then that affects our after-death state too, I believe. And the less wild emotions that we experience in this life causes a more peaceful after-death experience, because that energy that we generate has to be worked out somehow or another. It has to be worked out. Everything that we set into effect through what we think and feel has to be worked out. If it doesn't get worked out right now in this lifetime, it'll get worked out after we pass away, and surely in the next lifetime or several lifetimes. Does anybody think about preparing for your next lifetime?
I do.
Have you ever thought about that? We should. I mean, if we zoom out and look at the grand plan of life, our personality, Paul Benedict, I'll only be here until I'm 80, 90, 100 years old. And then what? Well, I don't think I'm going to end then. I'll probably come back and do it all over again many times. So why don't I try to plan for the future and understand how this works, so I can set the cards or the dice in motion to create it the way I want. So anyway.
So that brings up a good point. What is it that reincarnates? You know, I, Terry Hunt, create a certain amount of karma during this lifetime. It's not all going to get worked out before the end of my life, obviously. You can't really separate the idea of karma from the idea of reincarnation. Because if you look around you, you see people born in many, many different situations. Some people are born perfectly healthy, to parents who are relatively well-to-do. They have seemingly every possible opportunity available to them in life. They get a good education, they have a good job, they find friends and partner easily. Everything just seems to work out for them. And then you have other people who are born with serious deformities, crippling, sometimes mental, sometimes physical, sometimes emotional problems. And you can't deny that there's a vast disparity among the situations people are born into. How do you account for that? Religion can't. Most religions, well, I shouldn't say most, but religions that do not embrace reincarnation can't explain it. They just tell you it's God's will, just accept it, and just learn to deal with it, basically. Well, that didn't work very well for me. I want to know why. It's not good enough to just say, well, just accept it on faith. I want to know why. So, once I realized that karma and reincarnation work hand in hand, I'm like, okay, I can deal with that. That makes sense to me. So what happens? During this lifetime, I will create a certain amount of karma that will not get worked out and that will carry over to another lifetime. There's an unusual phrase in the Bible that says the sins of the father will be carried to the third and fourth generation. It makes it sound like, and most people interpret it, that if let's see, if Paul does something wrong, if he sins, then his children, his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren are also going to pay for it. Isn't that what it sounds like?
It's true.
Well, that's not what it actually meant. What it means is that it carries on for 2 or 3 lifetimes of that individual. You won't necessarily see the effects even in the next lifetime. It may be 2 or 3 or 4 lifetimes down the road before you are even in a position to deal with that particular karma. Keep in mind that in the early stages, and when I say early, I mean for hundreds of lifetimes of your existence in human form, you're creating all kinds of havoc. I tell people,
Like a child, right?
You should, yes.
Like a child.
It's the, you know, the child acting up. You should feel lucky that you can't remember past lifetimes, because we've all been murderers, rapists, plunderers, thieves, pirates. We've all done it, all of us, every single one. So probably it's best that we can't remember the details. We didn't miss out on any of the lessons that we learned. Those always carry over. Always you will remember the lessons learned. But the mistakes you made are unlearned lessons. Well, karma is your opportunity to learn things that you were not able to learn before. So all of these early lifetimes, we're accumulating more and more karma. It's enormous. Only when you start to become somewhat enlightened do you start decreasing that load. That's why the Buddha said, cease to do evil, learn to do good. In other words, stop adding more karma and start working off the karma.
Most of the things we discuss are based on the understanding of reincarnation. I'm not sure if everyone believes in it or kind of accepts that it might be a possibility, but most of the things we're talking about are kind of based on the idea that we do reincarnate at different times over many, many, many thousands of years on Earth. So with that being said, when a human soul comes into a human body for its very first time, it starts generating karma. We'll talk about if plants and animals generate karma too, but it's said that the consciousness that incarnates into a human being for the first time was previously incarnating in animal bodies, then before that, plant bodies, before that, perhaps mineral. I know that's an interesting concept for someone who's never heard it before, but there is consciousness in the mineral world. It's a very, very rudimentary type of consciousness, but there are lessons to be learned from rocks, from being a rock. Some of us still act like rocks. We didn't learn the lessons through the millions of years as a piece of granite. So when the soul incarnates for its first time into a human body, we start generating karma through our physical actions, through the thoughts we think, and through the emotions we feel. Any thought that we think has a corresponding reaction, and that's very, very important to think about, and it changes things. We have a little exercise that we do sometimes where we practice imagining everyone being able to read our thoughts at all times. Can you imagine how that would change the way you think if you knew that everyone can read your thoughts at all times? Well, humanity is going that way. I'd be willing to wager a pretty large bet that in the very, not sure how near future, everyone will be at some degree telepathic, and that'll be we'll have to really exercise much more mind control than any of us can do now. Anyway, okay, so when we first incarnate, we start generating karma. Every lifetime, we generate karma from everything we do. Whether we deem it as good or bad, that's beside the point. We generate actions which are going to come back to us as effects. Every lifetime it builds up. And only at some point when we start realizing how this works do we start eliminating some of that karma. So the first type the first subset of karma is the total storage of karma that we carry around on our backs, that we take with us from lifetime to lifetime, and we keep adding to when we generate new karma through our thoughts, actions, and emotions. The second portion of karma we're talking about, each lifetime when we incarnate into a certain family, in a certain time in history, in a certain nation, in a certain socio-economic situation, there's a specific set of our total store of karma that is kind of set forth for us to work through in this lifetime. 80 or 90 years is just a small blip on the grand scheme of our soul's existence, right? So we might incarnate over 700 times, over 1,000 times before we've learned everything there is to know that this earth can teach us. So the total store in our sack that we carry around, the portion that's set forward for us to work through on this lifetime, and then any new karma that we create in that particular lifetime. So 3 different kinds. Also, as we become more and more aware and more conscious and more understanding of how this works, we start eliminating it. Instead of adding to our big sack that we carry around, we start eliminating past karma. And it is possible, if we become more aware, to seek out opportunities to eliminate karma that wasn't even set forth for us in this lifetime. And that's usually with people who are fairly advanced on the spiritual path. They take their karma as it comes, they work through it, and they even seek opportunities to eliminate and work through more karma. As we become more advanced and more understanding of these spiritual concepts, we generate less and less karma, and we work through more and more. And the goal in each particular lifetime is to end up with less than we started with. Right?
Is it?
Well, and he's absolutely right. You know, you come into the world with a certain store of karma, and at the end of your lifetime, you either have more total karma or less karma. And which result you end up with is going to depend on your actions and your choices during that lifetime. This is a very different way of looking at it, isn't it?
I'm done with that part. So it's up to you now.
Oh, okay.
What's next?
All right. Someone was saying that, you know, talking about karma as a corrective force in life. I like to think of karma as nature's alarm clock. You know, have you ever seen those alarm clocks where they start out with a little ting and then it gets louder and louder and louder? Well, nature's alarm clock, which is called karma, starts out with a little blip on the head. You know, did your parents ever do that? Or, yeah, well, mine did. You know, okay, come on, wake up here. So that's the first, you know, and if you still don't wake up, then the next time it takes a ruler and hits you on the head with a ruler. And a lot of people still don't wake up. So then next it's a yardstick, then a 2x4, and then a 2x12. And if you still don't wake up, then the house caves in on you. But sooner or later, it will get your attention. So you get to have the choice. Are you going to wake up easily and on the first call, or are you going to wait till the house caves in on you? It's your choice. We can either practice being aware and trying to figure out how things work, or we can just kind of mosey through life and get buffeted around and knocked around and complain about how unfair life is, and at the end not have really learned that much. We talked about karma affecting not just actions, but thoughts and emotions. So you have emotional karma, mental karma, and you have physical karma. Now, keep in mind that no physical karma or emotional karma ever is created without the thought first. We talked last time about the hungry lion, didn't we? And what happened when you were perfectly fine until what?
Realized it was there.
Until you had the realization that there was a lion right behind you, and it was the thought of danger that started the whole avalanche of adrenaline flow and panic and trying to decide, do I run or do I try to face it? So it started with the thought. All karma starts with a thought. And in the Bible it even says, As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Your character is all based on your thoughts, how you think. Another thing it says is, whoever looks upon a woman and lusts after her in his heart, and lusts after her, has committed adultery already in his heart. So it doesn't matter whether or not you actually achieve your goal. If you have the desire and create that mental thought, you've already created karma. All right, so now who's affected by that? By that thought of lust, or it doesn't matter what it is. You know, let's say that some guy sees a pretty woman and says, boy, you know, I sure would like to, you know, get somewhere with her. What happens with that thought? First of all, energy follows thought. People say thoughts are things, and that sort of works for me, but I like the saying better, energy follows thought. Whenever you create a thought, there's a certain influx of energy that goes along with it. So that has some power now. In most cases, it's not a whole lot. We aren't very efficient in our thinking just yet, and it's to our advantage. It's actually best that we're not be very powerful in our thinking, because most of us are not advanced enough to watch it carefully. So nature gives us a little bit to work with. You know, you don't give a kid $50,000 worth of fine tools to go out and play in the dirt with. You take mom's old kitchen knives and forks and stuff, and you use those first because she knows you're going to ruin them. So we get finer tools as we hone our skills. Our mind is a tool. Right now it's a pretty rough tool. We're still learning. We think the human mind is quite advanced. It's not. We have a long way to go. In thousands of years from now, we'll look back at this time and say, oh my gosh, how primitive we were. What a bunch of primitive people. I mean, we look at cavemen and think of them as primitive. Well, we will look at ourselves as primitive thousands of years from now. We will have advanced in numerous ways. And so we have a long way to go before we can say that our minds are fully functional and close to perfection as far as humanity is concerned. The entire universe has intellect or mind. There's nothing that doesn't have intellect with it. So there are various degrees of intellect, just as there are of consciousness. The human mind has a long way to go still. So when you think a thought, number one, it affects you, because you are the creator of it. And number two, it affects the person it's directed to, if it is directed at a person. So the guy who is thinking lustful thoughts of a woman sends that thought directly to her, whether it's in his presence or she's, you know, not in visible sight right now. Doesn't matter. It makes no difference at all. That thought goes directly to that person and stays in the vicinity and affects that person and anyone around them. So if I think a thought, number one, I affect all of the people here. And if I send that thought to an individual somewhere, I affect that person and the people in the vicinity of that area.
My aunts and uncles and my grandmother are in Damascus right now. But they're accepting, there's nothing they can do about it. They've understood the concept that if they try to fight, it's a losing battle. I mean, they're just living there and accepting it.
Yeah, they wrote their script.
What's that?
They wrote their script, I think.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
They accept it.
I want to mention something very specific about karma, and that is motive. How does karma work in a practical manner?
Before we do that, should we ask if anyone needs a bathroom break? It's been-
Oh, okay, good idea.
Do we need that, or does anyone?
Anyone need a break? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Take a
We
5-minute.
don't consciously do it, I don't believe, But the natural law of equilibrium does, and our soul has a huge part to do with that, since our soul is the repository of all the experience that our physical body gains when we're in incarnation. The soul works with the huge supercomputer that is the divine. There's not really a computer anywhere, but it's the mechanics of how the universe balances itself out. So we need to experience everything. So we need to be born into a family in Canada. We need to be born into a family that lives in Chile, for example. We need to experience all these different things in all of the hundreds of lifetimes. And so our soul and the natural laws of the universe, they do place us in different places. However, we severely affect that when we develop attachments to certain things. And if we find ourselves incarnating in the same or similar situations over and over and over, it's because we're not learning a darn lesson that we need to learn, and we've somehow identified at a very deep level to some certain situation. If we keep being born into a Catholic family or a certain situation, it's because there's something that we need to release or work through. It's the whole, this is karma, this is what karma is. So we do choose it, but not in the way that we normally think. We don't get to pick, oh, okay, that's a rich family, I'm going to be born to them, so I can have all the opportunities that that any life can offer. That seems to make sense to me.
All right, let's talk about evil.
We're almost out of time. We only have
I know. Does evil exist? Is there such a thing?
Let's take a vote.
Yeah, let's take a vote. Well,
Sonia Sotomayor says it does.
I'm sorry, what?
Our Supreme Court Judge Sonia Sotomayor.
Oh.
She says it does. Did you see that interview?
No, Eugene, I think did. He's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Spelled backwards, it's live.
Oh yeah.
All right, so does evil exist? Well, it does exist if you define it as people causing suffering to other people. Nature doesn't create evil. Animals and plants are not capable of creating evil. Let me just state that if there were no human beings at all on this planet, there would be no evil. None. Zero. And the reason for that is that plants and animals live completely in harmony with nature. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, what about that tiger, though, that ate that little teeny animal?
Lamb.
A little lamb, yeah. Well, the way that tiger was created, it can't live on grass, so it's still, as squeamish as we are about it, it's still in sync with nature. And it is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's acting under the influence of its instincts. But humans, because we have mind, and because we have what is called a free will, have the ability to choose how we operate. We don't operate, most of us still operate from instinct. So anyone, including our own, what our past actions were. We don't know, but something that looks like a terrible atrocity committed by a person in this lifetime is not the re-equalizing force from something that happened in the past. All we see is a little tiny fragment. I've got to fix that. I've got to re-equalize it. Well, you just actually made it worse because you overbalanced it, and now it's completely out of whack. And so when we think we're equalizing something, we're usually not.
I think it's also important to mention that karma doesn't work at a 1-to-1 ratio. And you're mentioning this with the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It doesn't work that way. We were just having the conversation earlier that the exact retribution doesn't need to be experienced for the exact action that was set in effect. And especially that's the case with a person who has a fair degree of advancement on the spiritual path. As you are more aware and more understanding of things around you and of the world, lessons can be learned, as I was saying earlier, without having to go through them ourselves. So if I did commit a horrendous crime in a past life, I might not necessarily need to receive that exact crime or something very similar happening to me. I might be able to experience something else that is relative to it, or I might be able to even learn the lesson from witnessing it happen nearby me or something like that. So it's not exactly one-to-one, and it especially isn't as you progress farther on the path.
Just as an example, let's say that over previous lifetimes I've murdered 30 people. That doesn't mean that I have to die and be murdered 30 times to pay for that. Its motive is everything. And it's the learning curve, as Paul pointed out. If in the meantime I become somewhat enlightened and see how angry actions and selfishness operates in other people, and I make a change in myself and start being a more beneficent force in the world, I may not have to be murdered a single time to compensate for that karma that I've created. So it isn't a one-for-one event.
You said something else that was very good, that made a lot of sense to me earlier too. It has to do with the amount of energy put into it too.
Yeah.
So if your words exactly, if you're a member of Genghis Khan's band of marauders, and depending on the amount of rage and energy that you put into what you did, that's going to charge the effect. It's going to create a corresponding effect based on your amount of energy put into it. So it's an energetic correspondence there.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, in a previous lifetime, let's say I murdered somebody. That person was so angry and revengeful that in a new lifetime, they may try to murder me. Well, that person is responsible for his or her reaction to whatever your atrocious action was. They will create karma based on their reaction to you. You, on the other hand, may have learned non-reaction. And so you may get the same energy, the same anger back at you, but you may react differently. You may even be killed, and you say to yourself, you know what? Maybe this is simply a re-equalizing of karma. And you may accept it perfectly, with perfect equanimity. And it doesn't have to be something like that. Let's say an illness, for example. Let's say that you have an illness that is very debilitating for your entire life, or most of your life, or for 10 years. You can either rage against it, you can either say, you know, why me? Why does it have to be this way? What did I do to deserve this? Or you can just say, okay, I know that life is not unfair. I know that there's a lesson in here somewhere. So let me see how quickly I can figure that out and move past it. And it may take a long time, but your attitude changes everything. Remember, we said last time that events in life are going to happen no matter what. Suffering is optional. You get to decide whether you're going to suffer or not.
No one actually goes into your brain and wires it for suffering? I mean, you do it yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
You do. So there's another bit of karma. You're responsible for whether or not you perceive something as causing suffering in your life. I was just reading a little thing in the sayings of the Buddha about a guy who got a thorn in his foot, and he was saying, oh wow, this is really painful, and then he thought about it, wait a minute, it's only the thought about it being painful that makes it painful. Let me just change my way of thinking. And he became enlightened. Well, that's what enlightenment is. You get to choose your reaction to anything. So, does karma cause suffering? We need to talk a little bit about group karma. We have not only personal karma, but we have group karma. For example, all Americans share in American karma. You may not have been in incarnation in the 1860s, but you, being an American now, assuming that you are, share in the karma that was engendered at that time from slavery. The American people have to deal still with the results of our actions from hundreds of years ago. We're, as a group, responsible for that. Now, you could say, well, this is the first time that ever I've been an American, so why should I be part of it? Well, is it fair or is it unfair? It is as it is. We do share it. But only as long as you're a part of that group. If in your next lifetime you are born in France or in Uzbekistan, then you won't share in American karma. That'll be, you won't have anything to do with American karma at that point. Only for the period that you're a part of that group. So, if you were born Catholic in this lifetime, but you no longer identify yourself as Catholic and you just have gotten beyond that, then you no longer share in Catholic karma. As long as you don't identify with that group, your karma, a portion of that karma is gone. Someone else, it'll be apportioned among the people who do still. So once the organization dissolves completely, then there's no more people who are affected by that.
What about gender karma?
Gender karma, well, there you go, 50-50, more or less. As long as you identify as female or male, you're going to be a part of that gender karma. And there is gender karma. That covers the entire world. So we have all kinds of different groups that we belong to.
What about Seymour, Oklahoma? The tornado event there wiped out the whole place.
We're going to talk about disasters in just a few minutes.
Okay.
We've got that on the agenda.
Oh, good.
So, group karma. Just be aware that as long as you're part of this group, you are going to experience the karma that group created over whatever period of time, whether it's hundreds of years, thousands of years, etc. And that as soon as you don't belong to it anymore, someone else will take up that part of the karma. We have family karma, ethnic karma, organizations, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever groups you belong to, you're going to be a part of that karma.
And human karma in general.
Human karma, exactly. Exactly.
So do we choose, we do choose our families?
You do choose your families, perhaps not quite the way that you think. You choose your families based on your desires in different lifetimes and the karma that you create. So, whatever your family situation is right now, and a lot of families have a lot of intermingled karma, you're more than likely going to come back again with the same individuals to work out that karma. Not necessarily in the same relationship. You may be two married people this time, you may be a parent and child relationship next time. You could be siblings next time. So just be aware that that karma keeps you intermingled and meshed lifetime after lifetime until you resolve it all. It tends to actually get more involved instead of less in most people's lives. So awareness is everything. Once you start working to resolve everything, and remember that you can't make someone else be enlightened, ever. Only you can become enlightened, or more enlightened, because, as we said, it's relative. Enlightenment is relative. If you release all of your reactions and all of your attachments to results, or attachments to keeping score of who owes who what in relationships, if you release all of that, then you can rise above it. you can't have two people fighting unless both are willing to fight. It's kind of like the sounding board effect that was mentioned last time. If you don't provide anything for them to hit against, then you've got one person fighting a battle and no one else is opposing. There's no one else to fight back.
Something I can add to that. In regards to choosing our parents,
Put it into practice. Motive is everything. Motive is everything. The law recognizes that in crime. For example, you have first-degree murder, which means what? Premeditated. That means that you planned it out ahead of time. For whatever reason, I want this person dead. So this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to carry that out. So it was carefully thought through, premeditated, first-degree murder. Second-degree murder, the motive is, it may have been a crime of passion or something. The wife finds her husband in bed with her best friend or something, pulls out a gun and shoots him. So, she's just crime of passion, maybe second-degree murder. And then they have third degree, they have manslaughter, and they have negligent homicide. You're in a driving your vehicle, and you're looking at a text message on your phone, and you smash into someone, and they end up dead. Negligent homicide. You didn't intend to, but you also were not careful. Karma is the same way. Whatever intention you put into the thought, which created an action, determines the kind of karma that you have created. So, it's the same way. If you are negligent and cause someone's death, you have created some karma for yourself, even though you didn't intend to. It's because you should have known better and were careless. And we have to accept responsibility for everything we do in life. We can't say, well, I didn't know that they would get hurt, because you actually should know enough that you don't do texting while you're driving, etc. So motive is everything.
We talked about this a little bit last time in regards to the ego, or speaking and describing yourself in terms of physical things. I forgot who it was. It might have been Lisa who asked, how would you introduce yourself to a group of people? A spiritually advanced person who doesn't have a huge ego, how would you describe yourself if you have college degrees and all these credentials and a lot of money, and how would you introduce yourself to a group without having any ego involved with that? It's exactly this. It's the motive. If you can state facts without having any ego attached, that's your motive. But if you state the facts of your accomplishments in life with the intention to make yourself sound better than someone else, then that motive would generate karma. And we touched on it last time, but Terry just explained it very well in terms of motive. It's your motive, and no one can ever judge that but yourself. No one can ever judge how you describe yourself or how you explain your accomplishments or anything in your life, things that you have, material possessions, but you. It's all about the motive up here and in here.
So where does the social responsibility play into this without affecting someone else's karma? In a catastrophic part of the world, for example, or even closer to here at home, when you feel compelled to really try and help and make someone else's life better.
Okay, we're going to cover that. Do we interfere with other people's karma when we try to help? Yes, we're going to cover that. Mary Ann brought up an important part during the break, and that is when you're worried about someone, and specifically some of you have or have had in the past teenage children. It's kind of hard not to worry about teenagers, isn't it? Especially when they have a driver's license and et cetera, et cetera. And when they go out on the weekend, it's not easy to stay at home and not worry about what could happen, right? especially if they tend to be a little bit reckless and a little bit careless sometimes. So the question was whether or not we create karma by anguishing or by worrying about what might happen, an accident. And the answer is yes. You can actually enhance the chances of that happening by worrying about it. Just as you enhance your chances of failing a test by worrying that you're going to fail. Paul, let's see, for example, if you have a board that's 1 foot by 30 feet and you set it on the floor, there's not a person among us that couldn't walk that board without falling off, right? Well, maybe I couldn't. Why is it then that when you raise that board 100 feet in the air between two buildings, some of you would not be able to do that? What is the difference? It's just as stable. It's still the same width. There's nothing different except what?
Consequence of dying.
The consequence of dying.
And
It's your
thoughts about
perception.
it.
It's your thought. It's the fear. It's the fear of dying. You're not afraid of falling 2 inches off of it, but you are afraid of falling 100 feet.
That's good.
So what changed is your perception. So that idea in your mind causes your feet to wobble, and you can no longer perform the function as well as you could before. So the thought created some kind of an effect. We do the same thing when we project into the future fear of failure or fear of something happening. We're actually enhancing the chances that it will happen. So what do we do instead? Realizing that life brings events that we don't like to hear about sometimes. We accept the fact that they do occur sometimes, but we also instead send positive thoughts to the individual. If you have a teenager that's going out on the weekend driving, surround him or her with positive thoughts of protection. White light, surround them with white light and love. And that at least will have a positive effect rather than a negative one. Whenever we hear about disasters, and let me just mention that in our book we mentioned an interview that Katie Couric, no, it wasn't Katie, it was Anne Curry had with the Dalai Lama. And it was right after that disastrous earthquake in Tibet. And she said, "Your Holiness, how does it make you feel when you hear about this terrible disaster, knowing that you are not able to go into China because of the political situation and help your own people?" And he gave her a magnificent answer in his wonderful English. If you ever want to see something funny, look at one of his interviews where it does the captioning. It makes absolutely no sense. Anyway, so he said something really wonderful. He says, "Whenever I see or hear of a tragedy like this, I always think about a Buddhist master and what he said. He said, if there's something you can do to help, help. If there's something you can do to help, there is nothing to worry about. If there is nothing you can do to help, there is nothing to worry about." In other words, if there is something you can do about it, then go do it. There's no sense of worrying about it, just go do it. Go help, go volunteer, donate some money, whatever you can do to help. If there's nothing you can do to help, worrying is not going to help. So just be okay with it. Just accept it. Just like the people in India accept their fate of being homeless and penniless, and I noticed exactly that when I was there. Some of the happiest people I've ever seen on earth were living in the streets. They had their little shrine set up on the sidewalk, and they were just seemed perfectly happy. I didn't see any sense of you know, unhappiness among them. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. But when we accept everything with equanimity, it changes everything. When we just say the world is as it is, and when we understand karma, we can say with assurance that perfect justice rules the world. Perfect justice rules the world. This law of harmony is going to balance out everything. We don't have to act as the karma police. We don't have to try to force our neighbors and enemies and friends and co-workers into doing things a certain way. Let karma work it out. Unless you happen to be in the judicial system or a policeman, it's not your position to try to equalize it. A lot of times we make it worse instead. You know the old saying of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? It's supposedly based on karma. If I you know, put out your eye, then you have your eye put out. And in one form of Islam, Sharia, what is it called? Sharia, I believe. They absolutely do that. If you steal an item, you get your hand chopped off. It's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But karma works a little bit differently. It's number one, motive. So we can't, as individuals, judge a situation accurately. Never can we judge accurately because we only have a tiny fraction of all the information. First of all, we have only what we're privy to currently, and there's a whole ton of information that is in the background that we can't see, and there's even more that comes from previous lifetimes. We don't
valued understanding that they had about the event, you see, and they really got it and moved it out with a miracle from God on some level. That would wipe it out, and that would be relating to the violet flame or keepers of the flame. Perhaps their concept. This is just my conjecture, okay?
And we don't have to have the same ideas. We don't have to see it the same way. Like I said, we're not attached to being right.
Yeah, no, I'm just giving you an opinion when I think maybe what miracles would be.
Okay.
And I've experienced some myself, so that's why I'm bringing that out.
In most Christian faiths, they have what is called vicarious atonement. So the question is, can one individual wipe out all of your evil deeds or, you know, bad choices? And that's kind of like instantaneous wiping out of karma.
Well, maybe not all of them, maybe one event of karma that you would be based on some miracle that happened to you if you're in that situation, is all I'm saying. Where
But
you would find that miracle.
in Christianity, and I've seen it even in other gurus who said they took on the karma of some of their followers, for example. I don't see that one individual can take on the karma of other people. It doesn't make sense, because to me that would be denying them an opportunity for growth. I mean, that's why we title this, Don't Take My Karma Away From. I need that. I need that system that keeps bringing me back.
Lisa had a question.
Yes.
Yeah, and just on that note too, just in the Catholic tradition of the Sacrament of Reconciliation, you know, going in and kind of giving this litany of sins that you had, and then, you know, telling the priest, and then receiving your penance, and then all was done. It was a very easy way. I never really got that it was that quick, you know, that then everything would be right.
Right.
Which seems like a little bit of an easy way out. Back to just social responsibility. So taking the example of the Holocaust, the German families, for example, that put their lives in jeopardy and the lives of their children to hide Jews, how, what are your thoughts on, again, interfering with someone's karmic?
Very good. This is very good. We'll cover just this topic and then we'll end here. Can you interfere with other people's karma? You can't negate it, but what you can do is give them a chance. For example, someone who has an illness, should we not recognizing that karma, that illnesses are caused by our thoughts, emotions, and actions, are we interfering with a person's karma by trying to heal them? Whether it's by prayer or by using Reiki, or whether it's by medical means. And the answer is that the results of karma will always work out. They will always be felt. But you can actually help them, give them a chance to have sort of a respite, so to speak, until they're able to figure it out on their own and eliminate all of the core causes. So, for example, a person who has severe back pain, for example, if you do Reiki or chiropractic adjustment or something, what you're basically doing is realigning their energy flow. It's usually there's a result of some kind of an energy blockage. And by whatever means you can sometimes release that. But unless the person has changed completely their way of thinking, it's going to return again. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with trying to help. Whether it's, helping in the Holocaust, if your motives are pure, you will be in good shape. If you're trying to help someone who is suffering, if your motive is really to try to help them, you're in perfectly good shape. And you're not going to be interfering with their karma, because their karma is going to work out no matter what. You are helping yourself too when you do good deeds. When you're thinking from a universal point of view, and not, oh, I want to do it so other people will think I'm a good person. Motive is everything. And if you're unselfishly motivated, you're on perfectly safe ground. So, just as a couple of last thoughts, and then I'll let Paul give you the last thought.
That's my last thought.
Accept responsibility for your life. Not just choices you've made now, but for everything. This is just a suggestion. Accept the circumstances into which you were born at the beginning of this lifetime, realizing that it was based on previous lifetimes. Accept whatever state of existence you're at right now, and just say, you know what, this is exactly where I need to be. Life has put me here. So my position is not to rant and rail against it, but to say, okay, where am I headed? Am I headed in the right direction? Are my motives pure? Am I doing the best that I can to gain further enlightenment? If not, what do I need to do to tweak that a little bit? And the second is to realize that you get to choose. If you think that you're suffering in life, then ask yourself, why do I choose to suffer? Just like the guy who had a thorn in his foot.
Usually had a foot.
Suffering ends. Remember last time we talked about the power of now? When you are in the now, there is no suffering. You can end your suffering immediately, just by being present, by being now. And that there is no karma in the now either. When you are present, when you are completely in tune with the universe, everything is completely in harmony. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have obstacles to overcome. but your attitude is everything. And you were going to say?
No, I wasn't. That's it.
And that's it.
You said it all.
All right. Okay, let's do just a 1-minute closing meditation. And
Did you want to say something, Eugene?
oh,
For some reason, it feels sort of important to inject this because of the questions I've heard today. And one of the concepts of this class really was about good karma and bad karma. And we've asked questions about evil and good, and that topic has sort of come up. And I think it's just, if I look at my own life and my own experiences and how it's played out, taking these concepts and working with them have changed my attitude about most of that. So I think it really is important when we judge something momentarily as to whether it's good or bad, that's the first place we start with, that I start with, is why am I passing that judgment to begin with. So I think when we're talking about karma, that's the one thing that helps me keep it in perspective as I'm moving forward, is that it's my judgment that's actually the first problem that I have to work on. And once I get that into perspective, I can usually look at the situation and find the lesson in it, or at least get a glimpse of the lesson, versus being caught in whether it's good or bad. So that was just something that felt important.
all right. If you want to get the light. Free will to make choices that are personally motivated for what I think is my good. Seems to be a good idea, but in the long run, we make a lot of really poor choices. We eat poorly. We hang out with the wrong people. We do all kinds of things that end up having consequences. That's the lesson to be learned. We learn by making mistakes. But you also only learn once you start becoming aware of what the results of your actions are. Once you start paying attention, then it's like, oh, now I see. Okay. I watch family members a lot. Number one, I've known them for decades. So I look at their lives, and you know what? It's easier to spot it in other people than in yourself.
Always.
So I can see the results of some of their actions. And I think, oh my gosh. I look at it, the results today, I trace it back for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I can trace exactly the choices that were made 30 years ago and what the result is today. And as Paul was saying, you don't have to make every single mistake yourself. Be aware, pay attention to what's going on in the lives of other people around you. And if you can spot that lesson, you won't have to do it yourself. You won't have to make that mistake. But you will have to be aware. And you will have to make some choices and take responsibility in your life for thoughts and actions and emotions.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I read somewhere, I'd like your thoughts on this. I read somewhere that evil is the absence of goodness. What is your thought on that?
Well, my thought is that evil is anything that goes contrary to the laws of nature. Good is whatever happens to be in alignment or is purposely in alignment with nature. So animals can't be evil. Humans can be evil because they can create energy that goes against nature. In other words, we are being selfish in our actions. Animals work as a group. They are looking out for the entire group. Humans are very individually motivated. We talked last time, we are of all creatures the most individualized as far as thinking that we are a single unit. Eventually we will get back to this idea that we are just one in an enormous group, and that the important part is not my needs personally, but the needs of the entire group and from a spiritual point of view.
I want to read this definition
Oh, okay.
from Theosophy. This is one possible definition of good and evil. Good is whatever is in harmony with the evolutionary purpose of nature by aiding the journey onward, and evil is whatever works against it. So good is whatever is in harmony with evolution, evil is
Yeah, but Terry,
against evolution.
how can you judge? How can you say it's evil when people are all working out their karma and think, we don't know what the real story
Exactly.
is, so how can I call it evil?
Well, we can only recognize from our point of view and for ourselves. I'm not going to say what's evil for someone else. It's not helpful for me to say, oh, that's an evil person. I don't know, but what an individual may be an agent for karmic forces
Right.
to re-equalize.
Right.
And in fact, Diane was talking about natural disasters, and let's go even further. Let's go like to the Holocaust or to mass murderers. How does karma play into these? And it's important to try to figure this out. I don't claim that we have all the answers, but we do have a few ideas. And one is to keep in mind that life is perfect justice rules the world. Now that doesn't mean that as individuals, an individual may be very selfish and may murder or may steal, may cause an imbalance in the universe that will have to be re-equalized. But on a mass scale, this usually is not possible unless it is more than just one individual involved. For example, the Holocaust could not have happened unless there were thousands and probably millions of people in Germany who were allowing this to happen and maybe even instigating it mentally. And we don't know what previous causes were for the people who were the victims of this.
Like the Bible stories where the Jewish people,
For the what?
or like the Bible stories, the old Bible stories, I mean, that could have balanced it.
Exactly. So we don't know all of the details of what the balancing force was. More recently, well, not more recently than the Oklahoma City event, but Paul and I were in Connecticut, very close to Newtown, just weeks after that massacre occurred. And people were still really having trouble dealing with that, especially since it was young children. And they were asking some very serious questions about it. One lady said that she had been trying to figure out for 15 years how something like that could happen. And after we discussed it for a while, she said, "Thank you, that finally answered after 15 years the question that I had." And that is that we don't know all of the past of the individuals who were involved. It's almost certain that on any large-scale event, whether it's a natural disaster or whether it's a human disaster, that there is karmic rebalancing going on. And it's not helpful for us to assume that just because these are young children, that there is no karma involved. There is karma involved. And as heart-wrenching as it is for us as human beings to see that, we just have to take a deep breath sometime and say, everything is working out as it should. And even if we can't see the details of it, as if we were able to rise in consciousness, we would be able to. It would make perfect sense. It's unfortunate that we can't right now, but what I ask is that over time you watch in your own life karmic situations, tragic situations on a personal level. Family members, friends of yours that are experiencing what you would really consider tragic events. And see if you can't trace in the past causes that led up to that. I can in many instances, not always, but many times I can, and often enough that I have confidence in this idea that perfect justice rules the world, and that over time, nothing will be unbalanced by one jot or one tittle, as the Bible says. We'll all be perfectly rebalanced, and through the natural law. We are close to the end of our time, so I would like to ask if some people have some specific questions about karma.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just was wondering, Paula mentioned earlier about the various countries. I'm sorry, religions is what I need to say, that maybe do or don't mention karma. So what's the answer on that one, or Christianity in particular?
Well, it's the idea of do unto others as you have done to yourself.
Yeah, do they mention the word karma?
Well, karma is a Sanskrit word.
So they wouldn't do that,
no.
Yeah, in that sense.
But actually that brings up a good point, and that is is there such a thing as a karma eraser? Can we get rid of karma? Like, I don't know, there's one organization that has what they call invoking the violet flame, and it's supposed to erase karma. Well, the whole point of our class today is I don't want anyone taking away my karma. I need that. That's my learning tool. That's what keeps bringing me back into alignment with nature. Because when I get off, and I do quite often, when I get off track, I don't want to erase the karma so I can go farther off track. I want something that's going to give me a little flick, and hopefully I'm going to catch it the first time and get back into alignment.
Terry, if you have, in relation to this, if you have an epiphany and you move your consciousness up so far due to some event in the past, and you move it out, then you could erase it. If you, not one epiphany, but you had a miraculous event of change of consciousness. And that would change the karma.
It would change your attitude, and then you would be able to eliminate that karma rather quickly.
That's what I'm saying.
The energy has to be re-equalized. It can't it can't be like an earthquake where it shifts.
Yeah, it could. If you had a miracle, in your life based on this issue, whatever issue it was, you could do that, I would think. That's just my intuition on it.
Okay.
I mean, that's a major thing that wouldn't happen to everybody. It would be something that could really make the huge change.
My experience is that consciousness increases gradually. And even if you have an epiphany...
Well, not an epiphany, I'm talking about a miracle. That's different. Well,
my idea is that there's nothing that is truly a miracle, because everything has to go according to the laws of nature. I don't see that anything can countermand or go against the laws of nature. It has to work within
it would
natural
still
law.
Act within nature, but I mean,
so I don't know what
there are miracles out there, and they happen all the time. And that's what I'm saying. If that happened to somebody because of their